Okay, it's time to commit. 2024 is the year for prioritizing yourself. Begin your new smile journey with Byte, and you could start seeing results in just 2 to 3 weeks. Just order your at-home impression kit today for only $14.95 at Byte.com. Byte Clear aligners are doctor-directed and delivered to your door. Treatment costs thousands less than braces. Plus, they offer financing options, accept eligible insurance, and you can pay with your HSA, FSA. Get 80% off your impression kit when you use code WONDERY at Byte.com. That's BYTE.com. Start your confidence journey today with Byte.
Acast powers the world's best podcasts. Here's a show that we recommend.
What is The Briefing Room? It's a behind-the-scenes look at how the criminal justice system works and the lives of the people within that system.
If you love true crime, well, these are the real people who do the job every day of making sure justice is served.
Hi, I'm Detective Dave.
I'm Detective Dan. Together we have decades of experience in local law enforcement, a profession that we think is often misunderstood.
So we're going to explore how to do it right, and we won't shy away from when it's done wrong. These are stories you'll hear nowhere else. Unique, frank, and unvarnished.
From the team that brought you Small Town Dicks, this is The Briefing Room. Episode 1 drops on August 30th.
We'll meet you in the briefing room.
Acast helps creators launch, grow, and monetize their podcasts everywhere. Acast.com.
And welcome back to Scarred for Life, the podcast where we open up old wounds by looking back at the films that scared us as kids. I'm Terry.
And I'm Mary Beth.
In each episode, our special guest brings with them a movie that traumatized them as a child.
This week, our guest is Kathy Charles, a screenwriter and author. She wrote the reimagining of Castle Freak, which is now playing on Shudder, and is a co-writer of director Travis Stevens' upcoming film, Jacob's Wife. Welcome to the show, Kathy.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to be here.
It's so exciting to talk to you.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
And we have so many questions about Castle Freak, but before we do that, we always like to start with how did you get introduced to horror?
Well, when I was a kid, I was really into horror films, and for a very long time, I felt like I was just one of those kids who loved horror films and loved monster movies, and there wasn't really any deeper explanation behind it. But then, as I started to become an adult, I started to think, well, perhaps it had something to do with the fact that my grandfather was brutally murdered when I was a toddler.
What?
And I say that half jokingly, but it kind of started to make sense for me. When I was around 4 years old, my mother's father was murdered quite brutally. And when I was a kid, I have some very strong memories of that time period. I didn't exactly understand what was going on exactly, but there were two particular incidents that stood out. One was I remember seeing my mother getting ready to go out somewhere, and she was dressed beautifully and she was doing her makeup, and I would have been around 5 or 6 years old at the time. And I said to her, Mom, where are you going? And she said, I'm going to court. Do you know what court is? And I said, no. And she said, well, it's a place where we try to figure out what happened to somebody, and I'm going to court to help them try to figure out who killed your grandfather.
Whoa,
and I said,
shit.
oh, okay. And then I went off and probably played with my She-Ra Princess of Power and didn't think anything else of it.
Good.
And then I think it might have been about a year later, I was rummaging through the drawers in my house because I was quite curious kid into everything. And I opened one of the drawers and I found newspaper clippings of about my grandfather's murder. So I saw a photograph of him. I saw the headlines. I could make out most of the article. And, my mother really shielded us from the truly horrific nature of what had occurred. She was estranged from her father, who was a very abusive man. So when he died, he wasn't really in our life. But, it's something that I believe when I look back that was quite formative, and I believe that it imprinted on me at a very young age, this idea that very bad things can happen to you in life. And it was actually my first novel that I wrote, John Belushi is Dead, which is about teenagers living in LA who are obsessed with dead celebrities. A lot of that novel was about coming to terms with my grandfather's death, and one of the main character is based largely on him. So I think that really contributed to my fascination with darkness and darkness from a young age. There were some pretty formative experiences in terms of my viewing that really imprinted on me. One was, I remember being a young child and sitting in front of the TV in my room, and an episode of The Twilight Zone was on. And it was the Hitchhiker episode.
Oh, yeah.
I was too young to know what the Twilight Zone was. I was too young to know exactly what the episode was about, but I definitely understood the vibe of the episode and the eeriness and the darkness and the finality of what happened to the main protagonist in that episode. And I knew that the hitchhiker getting into her car and saying, "I believe you're going my way," was not a good thing for her. So that really stayed with me, and the pervading eeriness of that really stayed with me. And it wasn't until I was much older that I was able to, ask people, "Hey, did you ever see this thing on TV with this hitchhiker?" And it was really terrifying. And they're like, "Yeah, it's The Twilight Zone, one of the greatest episodes ever written." So that had a big impact on me as well. And then from then on, I just started to kind of chase that sort of experience. My mother actually didn't like me watching horror films, so I would have to go to friends' houses to watch them. And I remember going to a friend's house when I was around 8 years old and watching An American Werewolf in London.
Oh, wow.
And being completely captivated by it. And I can't say I was ever really scared by any of these films that I watched when I was younger. It wasn't so much the fear that was the exhilarating part of these viewing experiences for me. It was the intensity of the experience. Because when you watch a horror film, it provokes a very intense feeling. It's very moving, it's very tragic, it's very romantic, and those are the sorts of horror films that I really gravitate towards, the ones that are these great, grand, sad tragedies that, sweep you up in their story. And The American Werewolf in London is definitely one like that. Another one is Carrie, which is another one of my favorite films. So I've definitely always been attracted to the tragic side of horror, and I think that reflects in my work, and I think it definitely reflects in the remake of Castle Freak. As the original Castle Freak is a very sad, tragic, moving, romantic story, and I've tried to capture some of that in the remake.
So So you watched a lot of horror movies growing up, but what was your first horror movie? Do you remember?
Well, I'm pretty sure the Twilight Zone episode was my first eeriness. In terms of horror, I think I remember sneaking out and watching Gremlins, which isn't really a horror film, but if you watch it now, it's actually pretty nasty.
It is. It's mean-spirited, but in the best way.
Right. So that was one. I remember at a slumber party seeing a very strange film called American Gothic, about a family who live in the mountains, and some people come and visit them, and the mountain people proceed to murder all of them. One of them is murdered with a set of knitting needles, which really imprinted on me as well. So they were the big ones that I watched. But like I said, American Werewolf in London and Carrie made a very big impression on me when I was a kid.
I can imagine. I don't think I saw either of those movies until I was a little bit older, but especially like at Carrie, I can't imagine being a young kid and seeing that movie, honestly. There's so much going on.
I watched Carrie when I was younger and had absolutely no idea what was going on, and I rewatched it this year, and I was like, oh, this is awful. Like, I knew it was sad, and like I got the broad strokes, but I don't think my young mind processed just how traumatic that movie is.
Right. It's funny when you're a kid and you watch these things, you take them on a certain level. And then when you get older and you revisit them, the true horror of what you're seeing really strikes you. But I think that's true of anything you watch as a kid. I remember watching, I was a kid in the 80s, and the comedies that I used to watch, I watch them now and I'm like, my goodness, I was taking in so many crazy messages about sex and gender and relationships and, my goodness. And I couldn't even contextualize those when I was a kid. And, you contextualize them now and you think, wow, no wonder the formation of my personality is a little off. You know what I mean?
I do. I was a kid in the 80s too. And I remember, going back and revisiting some of the movies that were favorites as a kid. I'm like, good God, this explains a lot.
Right. My sister and our favorite films were, Revenge of the Nerds and things like that. Yeah. Bachelor Party. In Bachelor Party, there's a donkey show and the donkey ODs on drugs. It's nuts. But it was the 80s and that's what we all used to watch, Yeah. But there was one film that quite frightened my sister and I, which is really quite hilarious because it was a comedy. The opening scene of Young Frankenstein. So we loved Young Frankenstein, but the film opens with a slow track in towards a coffin that is ripped open and there's a corpse inside clutching a box. And my sister and I used to hide behind the sofa every time that scene played because we were terrified to see the corpse inside the coffin, which is hilarious because it's a really funny film, but for some reason that was particularly frightening to us. But also my younger sister, I used to torment her because she didn't like horror films at all. And she still doesn't. She can't watch them. And I would do things like I would play, Vincent Price's outro to Michael Jackson's Thriller, and I would pipe it into our bedroom and she would be yelling at me going, don't play that song. So, I was a little mean to her at times, but no, the 80s were a good time.
So, as an adult, as an adult now looking at horror movies, what do you think? What draws you to them now? Is it the same kind of childhood fear, or is it larger thematic things?
Well, I think in terms of my own work, what horror allows me to do is really unpack human relationships in a very honest way. You can hide a lot of things in a genre film and talk about a lot of issues that may not be as palatable in a dramatic film, and you can kind of get to a deeper, darker level when talking about what drives people and how people behave with each other and how people behave in relationships. And, something I'm very interested in is, the darker parts of ourselves and how far we can take that, and also how much can you forgive people for the flaws that they have. And that's something that, I find really interesting, and horror allows me to really dive into that in a way that, that if I was writing drama, I couldn't. What do people talk about now? Do they talk about Kramer versus Kramer, or do they talk about The Shining?
Right.
So I actually think that within the genre, these, the sorts of, depictions of relationships, I think that they endure more than in dramas, because dramas are so literal and we're constantly changing and culture is constantly changing. But the tropes of a horror film, a lot of them, are enduring and they carry on and they don't change as much. And once again, you can also just hide things in there. You can look at a horror film on many different levels. But in terms of the horror films that I like, I really like ones. I love them to be romantic, moody, dramatic, sad, tragic. I want to feel like I've been punched in the gut. I want to walk around for days afterwards feeling lost in the darkness and the despair of what I've just seen. It's like chasing the darkness. Like when I saw American Werewolf in London, for days I thought about that ending, and it was terribly sad and depressing, but there was an exhilaration to it as well. That kind of darkness is it's romantic. romantic and it's seductive. So that's definitely the sort of film I gravitate towards. I like something that's very narrative driven, that's about people. I'm less inclined to like something that is very set piece driven, even though I enjoy films like Hostel, as much as the next person. And I like slasher films, and there's nothing wrong with them, but I really like something that kind of gets to the dark heart of who we are and what we do to each other.
So what was the last movie that punched you in the gut like that?
Well, one of my favorite films is Mulholland Drive, and I feel like Mulholland Drive is this beautiful hybrid of, Hollywood story, horror movie, romance, art house film. It brings all of those elements together to an ending that is utterly devastating. And if I'm in the mood to be really devastated, I'll pop Mulholland Drive on and have a good time with that. Another film that I saw, another more recent film, was a British horror film called Dark Song.
Oh my God. I love Dark Song.
Yeah, it didn't get as much attention as it really should have. It was so incredibly moving and mind-blowing and touching and beautifully made. And that made a really big impact on me as well. If people haven't seen A Dark Song, seek it out. It's just such a wonderful, sad film.
It's so good. And it's a slower paced film, but in a really tense way. And it's just, I wish, like you said, I wish more people have seen it because it's really beautiful. IFC Midnight put it out, I think. So if you guys need another movie to watch, I really recommend that.
One last question before we get to the creative stuff. Do you have a favorite horror movie as an adult now?
It's always a toss up between Carrie and An American Werewolf in London. I mean, those are the two. Those are the two really big ones for me. If you looked at my horror top 10, it's filled with Stephen King, which is not unusual. I broke into the industry writing a Stephen King biopic, so I'm very obsessed with Stephen King, as we all are. But in my top 10, you would have Pet Sematary and Christine and The Shining, and but Carrie. I think Carrie is I think that could be my favorite horror film by default because Brian De Palma is my favorite film director of all time.
Oh, okay.
So then by default, that should really be my favorite horror film. But, it vacillates between that and An American Werewolf in London. They're both, they're incredible films. Incredible.
Sweet.
Yeah. Transitioning to Castle Freak, can you tell our listeners a little bit about this new reimagining of it?
I can't say too much because it's packed with surprises that I don't want to ruin. There's a lot of surprises in there, so I don't really want to ruin any of that. All I'll say is that one of the things I was interested in doing was kind of expanding the universe of the film and bringing in a lot more of the Lovecraftian legends to the story. And that was something I had done on the Stephen King biopic that I wrote that will most likely never be made. I basically put Stephen King within the universe of Stephen King's work. So it was half conventional biopic and half genre film where Stephen King was interacting with characters from his stories, and it was like I'd placed him within one of his own stories because I thought that was really interesting. How would Stephen King fare in a Stephen King story? So Castle Freak was a little similar. I just wanted to bring in a large amount of Lovecraftian lore from a multitude of different Lovecraft stories. So obviously the source material it's loosely based on a story called The Outsider, but there's also a lot of other Lovecraftian lore in there as well. And I won't bring up specific stories because I don't want to spoil anything for anyone watching it. But, that was something I was really, excited to do because obviously, the original, Castle Freak, I mean, it's fantastic. It's directed by Stuart Gordon and written by Dennis Paoli, one of the greatest genre screenwriters of all time. So, I couldn't possibly seek to achieve what they achieved with the original Castle Freak. So I thought, well, how do I make the story a little bigger, a little brasher, and just bring in some more of these elements. And hopefully it's something that people really dig.
So the other thing is that since we do have you on, and I know it's not coming out for another I think like maybe April is what I'm hearing. But I got to ask about your co-writer on Travis Stevens' upcoming film, Jacob's Wife. Is there anything you can kind of share about that movie?
No.
All this lead up for nothing.
All I can say is it's really great. It's got Barbara Crampton and Larry Fessenden in it. Oh my God.
Yeah. Like, how could you go wrong?
Exactly. And it's really fantastic. And I was really so grateful to Barbara brought me onto that, and it's just been a really great experience, and people are going to love it. And, you know, I still remember sitting at Cine Family in Los Angeles, seeing Habit for the first time, and being so taken in with Larry and his performance, and then getting to meet Larry and be on set and see him working with Barbara and, you know, and working with Barbara, you know, it's, you know, it was fantastic. So, yeah, I really can't give anything away, but I think people are really going to dig that film.
Hell yeah.
I can't wait. Like, I was really excited, like, when I saw Barbara and Larry, because Larry is incredibly watchable. He is, even if he's in like for a very short amount of time, like I'm thinking about You're Next, another movie they're both in. Like, his performance in that is so captivating just in that brief moment that he's there.
Oh, absolutely. I was very excited when he was cast. And, yeah, it's going to be great.
Cool. And we love Travis.
And Travis is fantastic. I mean, Girl on the Third Floor. Are you kidding me?
Good.
So good.
Yeah.
So goopy and gross and amazing.
Absolutely. So, yeah, I mean, I'm sorry I can't say any more, but such is the nature of things. I would love to tell you everything, but I can't.
So we talked about your creative endeavors, but Kathy, what movie did you bring with you today for us to talk about?
So I bought Basket Case.
What is the secret Dwayne is hiding in the basket?
What's in the basket? Easter eggs?
What's in the basket?
Clothes.
What's in the basket?
Nothing. What's in the basket?
My brother.
What's in the basket? Open it, if you dare. Basket Case.
Talking about exploitation.
The granddaddy of exploitation flicks.
Seriously. So in Basket Case, a young man with a basket, there we go, carrying his deformed, previously conjoined twin, arrives in New York City to seek vengeance on the doctors who separated them against their will.
Yeah.
That's it in a nutshell.
So, Kathy, like, paint us a picture here. When did you first see this movie? What scared you the most about it? Tell us everything.
So I saw this when I was 11 years old.
Okay.
I had a friend in primary school, as you call it in Australia. Her name was Colby. Colby may be listening to this, so shout out Colby.
Hi, Colby.
Hi, Colby. So Colby and I were both very avid writers in grade 5. So we liked to write stories together, and we were also obsessed with horror films. And we would go to the video store and we would try to pick out the videos with the most lurid covers. And, you know, and like I said, like, it's not just guys who go to the video store and want to see horrific, horrible films. Girls want to do it as well. Colby and I, we were obsessed with really disgusting stuff. And, you know, the horror movie section at the video store, you know, the covers were so captivating, and there were 2 films in particular that really captivated me with the covers. One was Carrie, because the cover in Australia was just Carrie looking straight out of the cover with blood all over her face, and it was terrifying. I said, I have to know what's going on with this girl. But Basket Case also, you see these eyes coming out of a slit in a wicker basket, and this bloody dripping font of basket Basket Case. And as soon as we must have gotten someone to hire it for us because it was rated R. So I don't know how we got this tape from the video store, but we did. And we watched it in Colby's living room at around, I think it was 1 a.m. in the morning. I know it was the middle of the night. And we put this tape in, and it was Basket Case. And it, and it was probably the first exploitation film I ever saw. It looked completely different to anything else I had seen. The graininess and the gritty aesthetic of it, it almost looked like some forbidden object that I had found that I wasn't meant to be watching. And it completely took me in, and at first, it was gory and it was lurid, and it was this strange story and this strange creature. But then, once again, like when I watched An American Werewolf in London, this incredibly beautiful, tragic tale unfolded until at the end, I was so devastated for the ending of the story and the fate of these two brothers that I was just completely moved by it.
My brain is like firing in a million different directions by what you're talking about. But I kind of wanted to go back to the graininess of it initially, because that's something that, like, the first time I remember seeing Texas Chainsaw Massacre, it's that sort of like, I don't know if I should be watching this because it was so grainy and it was so low budget, but like not low budget, but it was like filmed in such a way that it felt almost that it could be like something forbidden that I shouldn't be watching. And I got that same way watching this, Basket Case, this week for the podcast. And that's something that I feel like, we're kind of missing out now with all the 4K and the, everything is looking pristine and beautiful, is that sort of like forbiddenness that something like Basket Case could give you.
Oh, absolutely. Every time I see a new horror film, I'm like, just put some grain in it. Just rub up the grain.
Rub some dirt in it.
You just rub something on it. I mean, you can do that. There are so many filters. Why aren't we using the grainy exploitation filter? And I mean, some filmmakers do. I mean, look at the Tarantino, Robert Rodriguez
the Grindhouse
movies, we can do it. And I'd love to see more of that because it really does. It's kind of, you get a visceral response to that sort of graininess because it feels underground. It feels dirty. You can see the dirtiness and it kind of sets you up. It actually aids the story because it's a dirty, dark, nasty story, and the aesthetic of it is also communicating that as well. So it's actually the cheaper, I mean, it was made very cheaply. I believe it was $35,000. But the cheapness actually adds to the effect of the film.
Yeah, I would agree with that 100%. Especially because something I was thinking about and that Terry was talking to me about was how seedy New York used to be portrayed and how seedy it is in this movie, and how that grittiness and that graininess really helps sell that sleazy kind of gross part of New York that's so common in those in the movies from the 80s.
Right.
You kind of want to take a shower afterwards.
Oh yeah.
Absolutely.
Also, the performances were almost like porn performances. Like the acting, I just have to say, it was not it was very awkward, but it made me laugh.
The acting is it's, there's, the performances are very interesting. I mean, one of my favorite directors is Larry Cohen, and the performances in his films are so over the top. And, I also love John Cassavetes' films, and they're also over the top. So on some level, I appreciate when a performance is not great, if it's a little wonky, as long as the performer is really putting a lot into it. I can still enjoy it, but it's interesting what you say about New York. The Museum of Modern Art actually did a restoration of Basket Case because I believe they also saw the benefit of having this time capsule of that period in New York. And one thing to come out of this pandemic is, we're actually seeing a lot of our urban centers are starting to decline. There's, a rise in violence, and there's, a rise in urban alienation, and a lot of these things we were grappling with in the 80s. So I'm interested to see what comes out of this period in history in terms of grindhouse exploitation cinema, and whether what we've gone through now is going to result in films again like basket case, potentially.
Taking it back, so it was like probably 1 a.m. You're 11 years old. You're watching this. What about this movie like scared you?
I wasn't scared. I was just really moved by Belial and his brother. I think it's because when you're a kid, your frame of reference for films that have a strange little creature in them are that you're meant to feel sympathy for the creature. Your frame of reference is E.T. and Harry and the Hendersons.
Oh, that's a good point.
And there's actually a lot of parallels between Basket Case and E.T., and I believe that they were released the same year. Basket Case is kind of like the nasty exploitation version of E.T., and there's a lot of similarities. There are these scenes in the bathroom where Belial's talking, Dwayne's talking to Belial and Belial's in the toilet, and it kind of mirrors the scene where Elliot and E.T. are in the bathroom and E.T.'s sick on the floor, and there's these weird parallels there. And I think because I was watching Basket Case at a young age, that was my frame of reference. Oh, this poor little guy in a basket. Oh, they separated these brothers. Oh, that's horrible. Oh, they should really, go after these people and kill them. I understand this. But watching it as an adult, you're like, oh, that Belial, he's a little fucked up critter and he shouldn't be killing people like that, you know? So, I wasn't frightened by it. I was captivated.
Captivated. Yeah. It's funny because, I remember being a kid and you were talking about sort of like looking for the lurid covers. Well, I remember I'm always like drawn to VHS covers, and I think it's a lost art. I mean, we've talked about this on the podcast multiple times, where it's like, I think people miss out on that sort of like joy of walking into a Blockbuster or whatever the case may be and grabbing like a bunch of like horror movies and you don't know what you're going to get. Because now you can just like change the channel, but like
just like a quick aside on designs for like wide release Blu-rays are garbage. They have like the big Rotten Tomatoes thing on there, and like a lot of the boutique Blu-rays put out great covers. But boy, oh boy, I went to Target the other day and the covers not great. Cover art is not a primary focus for the marketing.
Yeah, I don't think that the same level of attention is paid to design when marketing a film anymore. I think there's a lot of attention paid to the elements of the film, like the actors who you attach and the directors, and I think that that's where they expect people to decide whether they're going to watch a film or not. But I mean, also, I mean, the films that were being made back in the 80s, I mean, they were just, they lent themselves to better cover up because they were weirder, you know? They were really weird.
Yes, they were.
True, like very specific.
Right. And I mean, also at the moment, you go on a streaming service and everyone's using the same colors for their artwork. They're all using blues and purples and it all kind of looks the same. So it's hard to discern what you're watching. But you're right. When you walk into a video store, I mean, just the fact that you're picking up physical media, it really lent itself to that idea that this was an object that you were bringing into your home. You were choosing to bring it into your home. And, you know, like I remember reading books that scared me so much that I would put them under my bed because I was terrified of them. I'm like, I'm putting that book, I put Pet Sematary under my bed until the next day because I was too scared to look at it. And the video covers were kind of the same. So it's definitely a lost art form, I think.
You know, it's funny. I don't know if I've talked about this on the podcast before, but this just reminded me. I had a book and it was called Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark. And it had a freaky cover back in the original edition of it. I think the new one has been really neutered. But I had this book, and my brother, who was 8 years younger than me, like it was one of my favorites growing up. And like I held on to it because I had nostalgic value, and he was absolutely terrified of the cover. And he told my parents that I needed to get rid of it. And so my parents were like, you just need to hide it. So I hid it. We told my brother that we threw it out. And then one day he found it, and he, for the longest time, thought that it had like magically come back into the house. And he was terrified of it because he's like, it is haunted. So I can understand that kind of hiding it under your bed because my brother was terrified.
That's hilarious.
Of that book.
That's like the monkey with the symbols in that Stephen King story.
Oh yeah,
that they keep...
Monkey Shines.
No, it's not called Monkey
or...
Shines. It's called something else. But there was a toy monkey with symbols, and it was evil, and he threw it away, and he threw it in a river, and it just kept coming back. So that's hilarious.
Yeah, that was my brother for you. But like, I used to always get this movie confused with It's Alive because by the time I saw it, there was the third one was out. By the time I went through the horror movie section, the third one was out, and it actually has a bassinet in it with like multiple of Belial's, I guess, in the bassinet.
There's
but
three
the
of
cover
these?
is so.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, there's three of them.
Yeah, and I think putting the Belials in the bassinet, I think they were actually trying to bite. I mean, I could be wrong, but I think they were trying to bite from the It's Alive marketing campaign because the It's Alive films were very, very profitable for Warner Brothers. So that makes a lot of sense.
But yeah, so I always conflated the two in my mind, and I didn't actually see Basket Case until 2018 because it was one of the movies on the OG Last Drive-In that went for 24 hours. And I still don't remember much about it from watching that. I don't know what time it was airing, but like I must have been really out of it because watching it this week felt like I was watching it for the first time. But Mary Beth, this was your first watch too, wasn't it?
Sure was.
What were your thoughts?
My first note is what in the fresh hell? So I think I get this and Street Trash mixed up. I don't know. And again, it's cover art. It's all down to the cover art. I did not expect it to be as kind of horrifying as it was. Like, I knew it was going to be kind of silly, but Belial was way scarier than I expected. I don't know what I expected, but it wasn't that. Like, the thing that terrified me the most was the sound design and the noises he makes, like his breathing. And his screeching. It's also harrowing, like especially when you get like the POV of him like breathing really heavily as he's stalking a woman or doing anything else, and it just the sonic landscape of the film really got under my skin. It definitely freaked me out. I'll just put it that way. I was like, this is gross. Like it made my skin crawl. It felt gross. Like we kept saying about like the way it's filmed. It just felt like there was a creepy guy breathing in my ear. And it was nasty.
The sound design is fantastic. And you have that great scene where Belial is having a temper tantrum and he's trashing the hotel room and everyone's outside the door saying, is there some wild animal in there? And you can feel, I mean, I don't know who voiced Belial, but you can feel his utter animal primal rage. He's filled with rage against the world. And sound design is another thing that I don't think a lot of filmmakers spend enough time on these days because, I mean, sound is such a huge part of what makes a film really terrifying. And yeah, you're right. The sound design of Basket Case, it feels very real. It feels very visceral. And Belial himself, he makes some very, very frightening noises.
Well, and I feel like it takes it even further because Belial obviously looks pretty terrifying. He's got the creepy teeth. He's a mass of flesh.
His teeth.
Yeah, but it relies on more than just his aesthetics, which I like a lot. Like it's like, oh, it's not just like the way he looks that's freaky. It's everything about him. So I kind of appreciate making it more than just like a scary looking monster, but like a fully realized creature that even sounds strange.
Right. And it's a really incredibly structured film because the build up to the reveal of Belial, it's very metered. You hear him breathing, you see his POV, you see his brother Dwayne speaking to him telepathically. And so there's all this great build up to when you finally do see Belial when he bursts out of the basket, and the reveal is worth the wait. Like they nailed the reveal because you keep thinking, what is this thing? And how awful could it possibly be? And you're like, oh, it's pretty bad.
It's pretty bad.
It's pretty bad.
It's pretty bad. I think one thing that really threw me off in this movie though was these moments of stop animation with him, which were cool at first, but I was confused. Like there's that one moment especially where he there's stop motion, then he puts his hands, I think, into Dwayne's backpack, and it changes from stop motion very quickly to obviously someone wearing gloves and going through the bag. It's very interesting, like the way they chose to animate those sequences. Like, it was just very jarring and strange.
Yeah, I watched an interview with Frank Henenlotter. I actually love the stop motion sequences. I think they're so charming and so much a part of the charm of the kind of DIY aesthetic of the film. And apparently the director, he did a lot of the stop motion and he just didn't have the patience for it. So, stop motion is meant to be very accurate. You're meant to move a model very, very slightly. And I think by the end of it, he was just like, oh, just move it. So you get this really jittery kind of Belial.
Oh, okay. That makes sense.
Yeah. So it is very jarring when they cut straight from the stop motion to the hands. But once again, I just love the whole DIY aesthetic of it. And it actually led to some of the most interesting parts of the films. Like, for example, when they realized how difficult the stop motion was and how time consuming it was, there was a scene where Belial was meant to be running through the streets of New York City. And when they realized, well, this is going to be very difficult to do, and the stop motion is very difficult to do as well, that resulted in the character of Dwayne dreaming, and he's the one running through the streets of New York City because the two of them are telepathically linked. And that actually worked really well on a narrative level, that also, spared us having to see a stop motion Belial going down a New York City street, which I would have loved to have seen. But
I was going to say, I think that would have been awesome, but I get it.
One of the things that I do like about Henenlotter, and it kind of talks about, like, I was looking at some of the behind the scenes type stuff, and he kind of reminds me of like Larry Cohen, where he just sort of like, we're doing things on the fly, we're doing things on the sly, and we're going to try to like get these shots in with spending as little money as we possibly can. There was one particular like anecdote I saw was about the scene in front of the Statue of Liberty where they're like, we're not going to get a permit, we're going to film because by the time we're done and they want to throw us out, we'll have gotten all the footage we need. And I love that kind of DIY, like you mentioned, Kathy, kind of feel to this film.
Right, and you feel that energy when you watch these films. When you watch a Larry Cohen film, you feel the anxiety of we're trying to get this shot, and you feel the tension, and I think it informs the performances as well. But also, if you spend a year making a film, as they did with Basket Case, where they were shooting on weekends, you know that that's something that people are really putting a huge amount of effort and care into, because otherwise, why would you keep doing it? You would just give up. So I think that's a testament as well to how this film kind of transcends its exploitation context, and what kind of catapults it into another realm of being a very special movie.
Also, I actually really like the characters that are in this movie. In particular, my notes were all about Casey, played by Beverly Bonner. Mm-hmm. I love her in this, and I love her room full of smiley faces.
Oh, I know. She's got smiley faces everywhere. She actually, I believe she passed away only last week, which is very sad.
Oh, no, that's awful.
Yeah, she was in every single one of Frank Henenlotter's films in some sort of capacity. She had a cameo in all of them, and she probably gives one of the best performances in Basket Case. I mean, Kevin Van Hentenryck as Dwayne is so fantastic, but she's equally good, I think.
They're so good together, especially in the bar.
There's something else I've been dying to ask you. What's in the basket?
My brother.
Your brother! What is he, a midget?
No, we're twins.
Oh, I love the bar scene.
The bar scene is so good.
Right, and as a writer, I really appreciate that scene because it's a really natural way to dump a huge amount of exposition on someone in a way that feels organic. Yes, if you were very drunk, you would give all that information away.
Right.
You'd start going, oh yeah, my brother is in the basket and we kill people, and it really worked. I think Henenlotter is such a great writer, and I really appreciate the way he develops characters, and he really does a number on you in this film because you know, you're really with Belial and Dwayne while they're on their revenge mission because you understand it and you sympathize with it to some extent. But what he does after the revenge mission is over and they've killed the people that they want to kill, then it becomes a completely different story where Belial turns on his brother and then covets what his brother has. And it, you know, then your sympathies are completely thrown into question, and then it really gets pushed because Belial really engages in some horrific behavior, but then he has to bring it back again at the end to a point where you still feel something for Belial after he perishes. Well, he perishes in this film. He comes back in the second one, but when Dwayne and Belial perish, you know, it's played for a huge amount of sympathy. So that's a very delicate character balance that I think that they succeeded with.
And I think that there is a lot of delicate balances in this movie between the horror and the comedy. I'm thinking like of Dr. Cutter, who is one of my other favorite characters in this movie, because I love her as a villain, and I love that she is introduced having dinner with a younger man, and she's like,
that was delicious.
So are you. Come on, have some more.
No, really. I've had enough.
Nonsense. We're just beginning.
Listen, if I have any more, I'm liable to...
That's all right. I like you drunk. You're cute when you slobber.
Like, the power dynamics in this scene are so, like, reverse of what a lot of movies were in the time, and you see this very powerful woman who is basically like, yeah, this is my plaything for the night, and she doesn't even call him by his name. She's like, sorry about that, Cuddles. Like, she is sexualizing this young man, and I love it.
I thought she was Sigourney Weaver. For like 2 seconds.
I love all of the female characters in this film are great. They're all very assertive, bordering on aggression. None of them are wilting violets. You know, the grandmother who looks after Belial and Dwayne, she's very headstrong in what she's doing. Dr. Cutter is very headstrong. Susan is very headstrong. She wants to go out with Dwayne and nothing's going to stop her. And I appreciate these depictions of women in this film. They're very strong. Just as, in fact, you know, Dwayne's the one who is he's kind of
milquetoast in some ways.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
He has a cute face though.
He kind of looks like a poodle, but
I mean, he does have poodle hair,
but you're right. I didn't think about that. So, like, specifically, Kathy, about how all of the female characters in this film are actually written to be strong, like aggressive women that you don't usually see in movies like this. Like, they're all intense and like very much themselves and aren't ashamed of it. And I love that. And I think that is a really good part of the film, is that it's like, oh, we're not gonna make like typical female figures. We're going to make a lot of like more empowered than Dwayne figures. And Dr. Cutter, it's just so good. But also her death is very upsetting. That got me. That her death got me bad. I don't know
it's
why.
pretty nasty.
It's so prolonged.
It's long, and she's like, her screaming. It's really good and also very upsetting and like, torturous, and it just keeps going and going with close-ups on her bloody face, and it's just...
The hold on her face with the scalpels in it is it's such a good gore moment, but it continues to such an uncomfortable degree.
Yeah.
Like it just like lingers on
Once again, on a writing level, I really appreciate what they did with her, because they set her up to be so horrendous that you would go along with a death that was that horrendous. You know, they kind of set her up as, well, we're going to kill her in a really, really intense way, but you're going to like it because she's such a horrible person. So it was set up, but I do admit there's a lot of screaming in this movie.
There really is.
And it goes on and on and on.
Her death in particular.
Yeah.
I was laughing at the twin receptionists, though, that were
oh my God.
what is going on over there? And like,
are you okay? No, she is not okay.
Yeah, it's funny rewatching it. You do realize that there is a deliberate level of silliness to the film, but when you watch it as a kid, you watch everything very earnestly and very literally.
Yeah.
So you take everything very, very seriously, but it is on a lot of levels a very silly film, obviously.
What's silly about a guy carrying his conjoined twin in a basket around New York City? There's nothing silly about that concept.
Speaking of which, the flashback moment, I really wanted to talk about that because, like, it, I think, is the emotional core of the story with this idea of like the father who, you know, is yelling at the doctors that it should be dead instead of my wife. And his comment about why didn't you kill it before it killed her, which makes me wonder, is this like, is he talking about why didn't they have like an abortion because they knew it was going to kill her if it was born?
Yeah, I think that's what's going on there. I think that
like, it's a throwaway line.
Yeah, but that's what's great about the flashback. It comes right in the middle of the film. It's very lengthy for a flashback, but it's a very economical way of giving us all of that information. So, yeah, I think the obvious inference is that because the child was, you know, such a strange shape that when the mother gave birth to it, it ended up killing her. But the flashback also contains the most ridiculous kill of the entire movie.
Oh my God.
That's so insane. And then the cops go, well, we don't know what happened. So we're going to go away now and you can go back to your lives. When it's like, well, there's a contraption that has been set up that's insane and a man has been sawed completely in half and the cop's just like,
completely in
we don't
half.
know. So, you know, go back to your lives. We'll try to figure it out. But yeah, I appreciate the metaphor of the death, the slicing in half of the father. But, that seems pretty ridiculous.
I was like, did they hide it? Like, did they? I just had so many thoughts and feelings. Well, and that was right after he brings Belial out of the trash bag.
Okay, that scene was so upsetting to me.
So
even like,
sad.
He wasn't even dead. They didn't even check.
He wasn't even dead. They just threw him out of the trash.
A trash bag.
But it actually kind of reminded me a little bit of Batman Returns with Penguin's origin story. Where it's like there's like this like. You never see him as a kid. He's like in that kind of chained box instead of like a bassinet. And then the parents just like sort of dump him in the water and like, well, that problem's solved. But it reminds me that movie, I kind of wonder if this movie was sort of like an inspiration for that scene because it felt very much like a more gothic and more silly sort of beginning. But it reminded me so much of this movie.
Yeah, absolutely. But I mean, in terms of those scenes, there's a lot of instances in this movie where there are things that aren't really explained and we're asked to just accept them at face value. So, for example, Belial's always jumping into other people's rooms and jumping out of windows and then somehow getting back into his own room. So I can only surmise that he has traveled around the edge of the hotel, crawled around the ledges with his Belial arms and swung back into his own room. Or he has dropped to the floor and kind of slunk past everyone. But we never actually see any of those movements. We just see Dwayne's room door closing and we're meant to just accept, Belial's just found a way in. And I think it's really ingenious filmmaking, the way, you know, because as a writer, you're always trying to make everything work. Like, well, how could he possibly get back in the hotel room? And it's obvious that Hannah is going, I'll just show the door closing. People will figure it out, you know?
I did love that. I was like, the logistics make no sense in my head, but I don't care. Like, they dedicate themselves so much to that you're like, okay, like they don't care. This isn't like some accidental issue. This is like oh no, like we're just gonna just go with it. Right. It's fine.
And I mean,
don't worry.
To that point, we've gone with the fact that Belial is alive, that he must have his own internal organ system, that he must have a heart and a brain and all of these things. And he has miraculously has enough scar tissue from when he was removed from his brother that he can still walk around, swing around with his arms. So I guess how he gets back in a hotel room is a moot point, you know? I guess it's like, well, you really need that explained. You're looking at a meatball with arms, you know?
He has quite the upper arm strength because he is able to lift Dwayne by his crotch and also like hold on to the sign outside while also holding on to Dwayne at the very end. Like dude is dude is ripped. He is doing some
well,
pull-ups,
if arms are all you have,
pull-ups.
then I guess you have to be ripped. I guess you have to train.
And you have to pull around your meatball body. Like, you need good arms. I loved when he came out of the toilet with, like, his creepy arm.
Right.
And he just pulled himself out of the toilet. There are some parts of this movie where I kind of feel bad for Belial. Did either of you guys ever feel the same about his character or his... Come on, I don't know.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, it's that classic trope of the outsider who is different from everyone else and just wants the sort of life that everyone else has. And I mean, that's a parallel it has with Castle Freak. You know, these beings, I don't want to call them creatures, you know, these beings that are different to everyone else, and they covet what we have, and they don't have the tools necessary to get what we have in a way that is positive. You know, they're filled with rage and hatred against the world, and they're just going to take what they want because they feel so hard done by the world. And that's kind of a classic monster trope, but unfortunately what always happens is that the monster always takes things much too far. And, you know, I don't know if we can talk about the scene in the film, the most controversial scene. You know, well, firstly, how Belial achieves what he's doing or what he's actually doing is unusual.
I did not realize what he was doing. I was just like, oh, he's just rubbing himself in the blood.
Well, that could very well be the case because
I was like, there's no, because I did not think there was any way. I did not think that there was any way that could be happening.
Well, it's quite possible that what he was doing.
Why are you booing me, Terry? I'm right.
I'm laughing. I'm not booing. I'm laughing.
You know, I think he was possibly just copying what he had seen before. Like, he had seen in his mind's eyes through the telepathy, you know, I mean, I'm sure he had, through his telepathic, you know, resources, he knew the desires that his brother had. He knew the things that his brother thought about. So I think it was just maybe copying but there was a lot of blood. Whose blood it was, we don't know.
That was confusing because his hands were all on her face for killing her. There really wasn't didn't seem like show any other ways of him killing her. So I was wondering, where did that blood come from?
Well, I think the director, if memory serves, he said that the scene wasn't as grotesque as he wanted while they were shooting it. So he thought, I'll just throw some blood in there. So he threw all this blood in there. And apparently the crew were completely mortified. They said, you can't do this. This is utterly disgusting. And then, of course, that, you know, every exploitation film needs the scene. And the scene is the thing that everyone is going to talk about when they leave. It's the thing that people say, you have to see this film because you will not believe this scene. And that's that scene. And no, it doesn't make sense to an 11-year-old child. I was confused by it, to say the least. You know, but that's another thing that horror films, especially in the 80s, introduced you to. It wasn't just death and violence. It was also sex, but not just sex, sexual deviancy, criminal sexual behavior, sexual perversity. So you were kind of having all of these really intense things thrown at you. And, you know, watching Basket Case now, you can, you know, you know what's happening. But when I saw it, I didn't understand what was happening. It's like when I watched Evil Dead when I was 6 years old. 6, 7, maybe 7. Might have been 7. And you get to the tree scene and you don't understand, but you know something sexual is going on. You know, you kind of feel it out, but you don't really know, like, what the mechanics are of it. But rewatching Basket Case, I realized, if I was 11 and I saw this film, this must be the first time I ever saw a man's penis.
Oh, yeah. Oh. I was surprised about that,
too. Because I had not seen a man's penis by the time I was 11. And I saw this when I was 11. So that must have been the first time. And I know in American Werewolf in London, you see a flash of penis. But this was full frontal penis.
Oh, it's full on. It's going on for a little bit.
So I just thought that was worth mentioning, you know?
Yeah. I am always about celebrating the male peen in movies, and I think it needs to happen more often, and I was really happy to see that Hen Lauder kind of gave us that with this. In a very gratuitous moment. Like, it didn't need to happen.
No, and I'm definitely an equal opportunist when it comes to nudity in films. We've seen a huge amount of female nudity. I think we need to see male nudity, and I think a lot of male filmmakers shy away from it, and they'll make excuses like, well, men aren't as attractive. People don't want to see. I'm like, I want to see men naked. Yeah. I'm into that.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Exactly.
Well, and even when it is played, like, in movies, it's for comedic effect. Like, I'm thinking about with Borat, like the first Borat, where there's the whole, like, nude wrestling scene. Like, all of this is done for, like, a joke, as opposed to when a woman is on screen and she's naked. It's sexualized. And I need more sexualization of men.
Well, and I also feel like being naked in that in a non-comedic way is very vulnerable, and there is an issue with vulnerability of male characters in a lot of films. I mean, and I think hopefully one day we'll get over that, but it's like men don't want to seem vulnerable. And then when they're naked in any kind of movie where they're not like in a sex scene, it's a vulnerable position, and I don't think a lot of people know how to handle that.
Absolutely, it's so true. And like I said, I'm a big advocate for equal opportunity nudism in films, and I also think that. I'm not saying that the depictions of sexuality in horror films in the 80s or the 70s were particularly healthy, but I do feel that sex has kind of become decontextualized because we don't see as much of it in films anymore, and the rise of internet porn has kind of decontextualized it to an extent where the role that sex plays in establishing dynamics in a relationship has kind of been lost. And I think it's good to see sex in films because it informs character, it informs story, and it's a huge part of kind of the dynamic of being a human being and the power dynamic of being a human being. So I actually lament that there's a nervousness around sex now. And one thing I was really pleased to see, actually one film that did have an enormous impact on me this year, this is my favorite film of the year, is Possessor.
Oh my god.
Oh,
it's
so
yeah,
good.
it's so
good.
And also has male nudity in it.
Yeah, and direct male nudity.
And it's all about the invasion of a man's body by a woman. So the sexual metaphor is very explicit. And I thought it was really brave. I haven't seen a film that brave in a very long time.
Yeah, it's a phenomenal film. And I love in particular that scene with the cross of like the femininity on top and then the masculinity on the bottom, just sort of playing with like gender and in this very intimate moment. It's so, it's such a good film.
Okay. So Terry, how many creepy Belial breaths out of 5 do you give Basket Case?
I really dig this movie. I dig it even more after this conversation. We didn't really talk too much about the name of Belial, but like I was right before recording, I looked it up, and it is a Hebrew word used to characterize the wicked or the worthless. It makes me so sad because as much as like Belial turns into this very evil like idea of like codependency and like the sort of like nature between him and his brother is very toxic towards the end. I always think back to the flashback scene where the father is telling the doctors it's too late to change the other one, just cut Dwayne from it, and then they throw him in the trash. And it's such a powerful moment in a movie that is I mean it's exploitive. Let's be honest.
Yeah.
But so I think that this movie sets out to do what it needs to do and what it wants to do, and I admire the kind of gung-ho-ness of filmmakers in the 80s like Hen Lauder and like, Larry Cohen. So I honestly, I think for what it is, this is a 4 creepy Belial breaths out of 5 for me. What about you, Mary Beth?
So initially I gave this movie a 3 on Letterboxd, but after this conversation and really thinking about it, I'm going to give this 4 creepy Belial breaths. I think it, like you said, Terry, it knows what it's doing. Like none of it's really a mistake. All of it's just like throwing it all to caution to the wind and saying, fuck it, like, let's make something really weird. And they did. And it was great. And it was kind of funny, and it was kind of terrifying, and it was kind of disgusting. And it all just comes together in a way that maybe shouldn't work, but really works to make something just like genuinely 80s horror and still is scary today, especially with the Belial murder scenes. So that is my rating. Kathy, you have the final word. How many creepy Belial breaths out of 5 do you give Basket Case?
I give it 10 out of 5.
All right. Yeah.
Yes.
I should just mention my husband the other day, he was looking around our apartment and he said, we've got an awful lot of Belials in our apartment. And I said, well, what counts as a lot of Belials in an apartment? And the answer is 4. So 4 Belials in an apartment is a lot of Belials, apparently.
Yeah, I remember seeing, like, I think on the Instagram, you actually shared one of your Belial
oh, there's a Belial tiki mug. Oh, my
tiki
goodness.
Mug? I think it was a tiki mug.
Oh, my God.
Yes, it's a work of art.
That's amazing.
It's quite stunning. So, yeah, I like him. I like this guy. I like that he's in touch with his anger. He should probably get some help for it, but I dig what he's about, and he's an okay guy. He had a hard run. When you start life in the trash, you don't have the right skills to navigate the world. And anyway, I should probably stop making excuses for Belial's behavior.
Have you seen the sequels?
I have.
Are they any good?
They're fun. They're very different tonally. They're very comedic. They're very different to the first film. Mm-hmm. But they're definitely worth checking out. And Kevin Van Hentenryck, his performance just gets better and better. Like, if he was kind of finding Dwayne in the first film, he's got Dwayne down pat in the second and third films. So it's a lot of fun to watch. But yeah, it kind of becomes a little Muppety.
Yeah, I can imagine. Well, you're kind of going into that era of this one came out in 82, and then you're sort of moving into the more silliness of, like, I feel this film actually has more in touch with, like, some 70s films that you would see of that time, as it's starting to, like, crest into the 80s, and then by the end of the 80s, I mean, you have silliness, zombie Jason, and everything is just, like, really ridiculous. So that makes sense that it kind of gets sillier as it goes on.
Yeah, but there's also, I believe, if memory serves, there is a cameo in Brain Damage, in Hen Lotter's Brain Damage, where Dwayne appears with his basket, and that's quite fun.
That's awesome. That is so cool. Well, thank you so much, Kathy, for joining us to talk about Basket Case. Where can the listeners find you, and what do you have coming up you'd like to share?
I can be found on Instagram and Facebook, and I can't really share anything else. So Jacob's Wife will be coming out early next year. I have a few projects in development that I can't really talk about now. One was announced, which is a kind of elevated postmodern slasher movie called Slash Man.
Ooh.
Which is fun. So I'm working on that at the moment. But, kind of COVID has slowed production down.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So fingers crossed. I have a few things that we're hoping will go next year. So, and one of those things is kind of a little, has a touch of Carrie to it. So, fingers crossed that gets going.
Hell yeah.
That'd be so cool. Okay, so listeners, you've heard from us, but we want to hear from you. What was your experience with Basket Case? You can send us an email at scarredforlifepodcast@gmail.com or reach out to us directly on Twitter. I'm at MB McAndrews.
And I'm at Gaily Dreadful.
And of course, don't forget to follow the podcast at Scarred Podcast.
And don't forget to review, rate, and subscribe.
Thank you to Steve Barnold for our artwork. Thank you to Sean Keller for our music. Thank you to everyone for listening. Stay safe out there, but most importantly, stay creepy.
And until next time.
Won't somebody please think of the Somebody please think of the children! Somebody
Acast powers the world's best podcasts. Here's a show that we recommend.
What is The Briefing Room?
It's a behind-the-scenes look at how the criminal justice system works and the lives of the people within that system.
If you love true crime, well, these are the real people who do the job every day of making sure justice is served.
Hi, I'm Detective Dave.
I'm Detective Dan. Together, we have decades of experience in local law enforcement, a profession that we think is often misunderstood.
So we're going to explore how to do it right, and we won't shy away from when it's done wrong. These are stories you'll hear nowhere else. Unique, frank, and unvarnished.
From the team that brought you Small Town Dicks, this is The Briefing Room. Episode 1 drops on August 30th. We'll meet you in the briefing room.
Acast helps creators launch, grow, and monetize their podcasts everywhere. Acast.com.